Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z were the first two anime franchises I, like many others on the western side of the Atlantic, experienced and became emotionally attached to in the mid 1990s. These series proved to be a gateway for yours truly to another genre of animation that influences my choices for entertainment to this day. As I got older and more anime was localized, I discovered a Fist of the North Star movie that became something of a jumping off point for my knowledge of the series. Though I enjoyed the various anime adaptations of this long running manga, the few games I played with the Fist of the North Star name were average and simplistic brawlers. Thankfully, in 2018, the developers of the Yakuza franchise were given the chance to present a potentially new generation of anime admirers and franchise veterans alike the chance to enter the year 20XX after the bombs dropped to channel their inner martial artists. Popping this PS4 exclusive into my console, I was ready to bust some heads and make some drinks. As expected, considering this is made by the same people behind the Yakuza franchise, Lost Paradise features a lot of things to do in hopes of gaining 100 completion, and a full trophy list that includes finishing the story on its hardest difficulty. From various minigames to luck-based situations, such as hunting down arcade machines in the desert to finish a particular sub-story or side quest. A player will take reportedly over 100 hours to fully complete this game. Most importantly, Lost Paradise is built on the premise of multiple playthroughs, as the protagonist Kenshiro has a skill tree and special equipment that can't be fully leveled up or restored respectively until after finishing the game at least twice. I ended my first playthrough in 37 hours, completing about a third of the sub-stories and mini-games along the way. This is the type of game that won't be completed fully for a long time, if ever, but I will keep coming back for more on the strength of the combat system alone. Having been a fan of both the Yakuza game franchise for over a decade and the simplicity of Fist of the North Star's story, my expectations of what was to come from this adaptation were pretty high. Crafted with the same engine that powered Yakuza 0 and Yakuza Kiwami, Lost Paradise puts the player in control of the series' central protagonist, Kenshiro, the last heir to the deadly martial art known as Hokuto Shinken. Kenshiro's fighting style focuses on utilizing the pressure points of an opponent against them, hitting them in the right spot to cause painful, gory deaths via implosions. Thankfully, Lost Paradise doesn't shy away from the violence, showcasing exploding heads and limbs galore in correlation with the game's fighting mechanics. Like his digitized spiritual predecessor, Kiryu Kazuma, Kenshiro can punch and kick when the player taps the square and triangle buttons respectively to build up combos that will stun and even send opponents flying across the screen. Kenshiro can block when the L1 button is held down, evade and sidestep with the X button, as well as activate his version of Rage with Burst Mode. When the player fills up Kenshiro's 7-star gauge by successfully attacking opponents, and taps the R2 button, Kenshiro will turn into a fiery ball of fast-fighting fury, featuring special maneuvers and attacks for a limited time. There are also some modifications to accommodate this adaptation's fighting style. When Kenshiro successfully attacks an enemy, a skull icon will fill beside their health bar until it transforms into the circle button. When tapping the circle button while in front, behind, or even when jumping overhead or standing over a downed opponent, will allow Kenshiro to unleash a deadly attack via a quick time event, sending blood flying everywhere in glorious fashion. Rather than simply stick with the heat actions from the Yakuza games, the developers innovated and created a finishing sequence that is more entertaining from a player perspective than what's seen in every Yakuza game. Kenshiro can swing throwable items, but only the physical manifestations of certain enemies' dying words. When it comes to adversaries, Lost Paradise is a mixed bag. The enemy offering types are perfectly fine in line with those seen in the Yakuza games, including local thugs, giant mallet-swinging barbarians, and even little people cosplaying as Chucky mixed with Freddy Krueger. Fighting hordes of enemies at one time in Lost Paradise is nothing short of an exhilarating experience, when everything works or poor game design doesn't come back to haunt players. Enemies in this game move woefully fast, especially in regards to the larger enemies in size, as they need to be struck from behind, sometimes making it incredibly difficult to actually perform the strategy the game explains you need to utilize. Bosses are infamous for being ridiculous with their movement speed. It can hit incredibly hard, especially with the game having a leveling system. A majority of the boss battles aren't difficult or thrilling from a design perspective, just enemies who are faster, possess long-range weapons, or have impeccable blocking abilities. There are also times that the targeting system sees Kenshiro attack the closest enemy instead of the person right in front of him, potentially messing up a player's strategy. Also, getting knocked down is a detriment to Kenshiro, as Kenshiro won't get up until the player taps the X button enough for him to rise. Certain enemies will actually trip over Kenshiro to accidentally reset the button pressing, while leaving Kenshiro open for a devastating stomp. Equipment mostly works the same as what's seen in the Yakuza games, with items helping protect Kenshiro from blades, projectiles, and simple strikes. The most profound addition to the combat strategy is the Destiny Talisman. Destiny Talismen are introduced pretty early in the story, and allow Kenshiro to have special abilities that can be activated in correlation with his assignment on the D-pad, but have a time limit attached to them when used before they can be activated again. Some talismen can be activated automatically, such as Instant Revival, while adding another layer of strategy for bigger battles. Fist of the North Star never featured the most robust or profound storytelling, but did set a standard in the 1980s. Lost Paradise features an alternate universe story, with Kenshiro still living in a post-apocalyptic world, similar to Mad Max, right down to the vehicles made for moving across the desert for combat and searching out random objects that can provide crafting items to upgrade the buggy one of Ken's old proteges fixes up, for him to traverse the wasteland that also features a few very small towns. Kenshiro's journey quickly takes the player to the game's central hub, known as Eden, where Kenshiro will not only progress the story, but also take part in the 80 sub-stories, copious mini-games, taken and modified from the recent Yakuza games, including the Cabaret Club management, baseball, and Coliseum fights, as well as new stuff that would be incredible to see going forward in the Yakuza franchise, like Bartender Ken. When Kenshiro isn't knocking motorcycle riding thugs into the outfield, he's defending the City of Miracles from an intrusion with the hope of finding his lost love Yuria. The story barely lasts 20 hours, with something of a dip in quality midway through, as it pads the gameplay time with moments like finding a certain amount of items to modify the buggy. The last chapter, though, is incredibly epic, and mostly makes the player forget about the meandering moments. From a graphical perspective, Lost Paradise takes a more cel-shaded approach, a la Borderlands, that mostly works, though some textures look blurry and muddied. The audio presentation is very reminiscent of the source material, as the Japanese voice actors do a marvelous job, while the dub sounds similar to something you'd hear from an early 1990s Western localized anime. While Lost Paradise does have some obvious problems with the story's pacing, some issues in regards to fighting certain enemies, and a necessity for the player to go through the game more than once if 100% completion is the goal, the latter being more of a personal time issue than an actual flaw. The overall experience is definitely worthy of the franchise, and hopefully the beginning of a long relationship between the series and a developer that can make a bad game even if they tried. Like its spiritual successors and predecessors alike, Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise proves to be a genre-bending experience, part beat-em-up, part RPG, part party game, that, while somewhat overwhelming thanks to the various amount of things the player can do without progressing the story, still feels tight and not bloated to the point of exhaustion. While the game is definitely a great representation of both the franchise it's based off of, as well as the engine made for the Yakuza series, there are certain problems that may hinder the overall fun factor for the player, including frustrating enemies, and a story that doesn't reach the heights of even the weaker Yakuza games, in regards to pacing and padding. As a licensed video game, this is easily one of the best of the generation, if not one of the best in the last couple of decades. Fans of the Yakuza franchise will feel right at home with this, and will enjoy certain aspects even more so, especially with the fighting modifications. Those who are invested in the Yakuza games for their stories won't be very pleased with this offering, but will appreciate all the stuff the player can do, just like in the Yakuza games. This is definitely one of those games that should be rented by the uninformed, but purchased by those who want more Yakuza-style action in their gaming library.
Seven stars of death!
What the hell? Shelly Reaper's lost! This can't be real!
And the winner is Kenshiro!